everybody, and welcome to Alan History Nerd. In this video I'm going to look at the relationship between the President and the Supreme Court. This is part of my section on the powers of the President and restrictions on them, which is part of my wider playlist on A-level politics. I'm aiming to cover the entire specification, and I'm ploughing my way through the American section at the moment. So hopefully this will be useful for you if you are studying A-level politics, and even if you aren't, hopefully this will be useful for you in terms of understanding the relationship between the US President and the Supreme Court. So in terms of the A-level specification from EDEXCEL, this is 3.3.1, relationships between the presidency and the following institutions and why this varies. So the big bit I've done already on this is the bit that's marked in red. So there's a separate video that looks at the relationship and all that other stuff above in terms of Congress. And in this video, I'm just going to have a look at it in relation to the Supreme Court. Now, the President, Constitution, Supreme Court, this is kind of the nuts and bolts of it. The President has the power over the Supreme Court in only one way, really, and that is a power of appointment. But they don't control how many of these they're going to make. They will also need agreement of the Senate. The fact that the appointments are for life is highly significant. And once the judges are in place, the president has no power over the judges. What tends to happen is that if you've got a more liberal judge, they might retire in the middle of the presidency of a Democrat. If you've got a conservative judge, then they might make sure that when they retire, they do it in the middle of the term of a Republican who shares their kind of conservative views. You might be president for 4 years and not get to do one of these appointments at all. You might, and this is the case, and we'll look at it later in the video with Trump, that you're only in for 4 years, but you get to do 3 appointments and therefore can actually change the balance of the court. So in that direction, in terms of the president's power, it is the power of appointment, but it's not a power they hold by themselves. They have to get the agreement of Congress, which feeds in with previous videos that I've done, which looks at the power of Congress and relationship with the presidency. Essentially, in this case, if the Senate is held by the same party as the president, this is all fairly smooth. If it isn't, then it's a difficult job. Now, in terms of the other way around, in terms of the Supreme Court's power over the president, well, the president is required to carry out Supreme Court decisions because they become essentially the Constitution. And it is the president's take an oath to defend the Constitution and the law, and therefore they have to do what the Supreme Court says, essentially. Trump, of course, challenged norms on this, and because it's not only the case of the Supreme Court, but with all judgments, because they are the law. So when his immigration ban was halted by District Judge Robart, he referred to him on Twitter as the so-called judge, and saying that if there's any problems, any attacks or anything that happened because of this, then everyone should blame that judge. McConnell, the leading Republican in the Senate, as well as lots of other Republicans, criticised Trump over this. It doesn't completely stop them from being wedded to him for the 4 years he was in power, but we can see that, again, there is what normally happens, and then there's what happened with Trump. So that in that way, the president seems bound by Supreme Court decisions, and if they try and step outside them, or other court decisions, if they try to step outside them, then that is not seen to be responsible action by the executive. The court has really strong powers to check the president's power. It's through what is known as judicial review. And again, going back way back to 1907, Chief Justice at the time was Charles Evans Hughes, and he claimed we are under a constitution, but the constitution is what the judges say it is. And that is the essence of the problem that the president has got once a Supreme Court judgment is made. And it also means that the makeup of the court can be really, really important. To look at the idea of judicial review in a bit more detail then. So this means the court can deem the actions of the executives and the laws passed by Congress, and obviously signed by the president, as being unconstitutional. These powers date back to Marbury versus Madison in 1803, which is the first case or first judgment in which an act of Congress was deemed to be unconstitutional, declared to be unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court can use judicial review to interpret the meaning of the Constitution, and so what this can mean is things kind of move in and out of legality in the US. The Constitution doesn't shift; it's not been amended, but actually the judicial opinion on what it means changes. So, for example, if we look at the constitutional definition of cruel and unusual punishment, well, in the Furman versus Georgia case in 1972, it led to a temporary ban on capital punishment in the US. This only lasted 4 years and was reinstated through Gregg versus Georgia in 1976. So we can see, and this could be really important on a whole list of hugely significant issues in the US, on things like civil rights, abortion law, gun laws, capital punishment. It could ultimately be the Supreme Court that's making the decisions on these things, not a president or a Congress. Now, obviously, the Congress could overturn this through an amendment procedure, but the idea of a unified Congress, or 2/3 of a unified Congress in both houses, is something of a pipe dream, a lot of people would suggest. But a Supreme Court balanced one way or the other really could shift these really key issues in American politics. The Supreme Court also has played key roles in clarifying, or in the eyes of some people, deciding a couple of presidential elections. In 2000, it was seen as handing the election to Bush when it kind of deemed some of the action in Florida was unconstitutional in terms of delays and counts and recounts and all kind of things like that. In 2020, it threw out Trump's claims of being cheated out of the elections being completely baseless. So we see that whilst the president only has one power when it comes to the court has multiple powers that can affect the presidency. So it could be that they're deeming actions or laws as being unconstitutional. It could be that they shift the interpretation of some element of the Constitution, and that can hugely impact on any policy decisions that a president might want to make. And finally, they can make this decision about whether someone actually becomes president or not. So we're not seeing a very particularly balanced scale. Now, this one power the president does have is a really important one, which is the power of appointment. Well, in theory, this comes down to the president has the power to appoint to a Supreme Court justice when vacancy occurs. Now, a vacancy occurs because justice is appointed for life, either due to death or retirement, or it could be that if a Supreme Court justice got impeached. Now, the average, looking over 100 years, is that a president would expect maybe at most 2 appointments in a 4-year term, probably 3, maybe 4 in a 2-term presidency. What then happens is the president draws up a shortlist, the FBI do background checks, the president interviews 2 or 3 or however many that they've got their shortlist down to, and then publicly announces their nomination. The nominee is then rated by the American Bar Association, so very well qualified, or not qualified, and essentially unless you get very well qualified, you shouldn't really have much of a hope, though there have been people who have got through on that rating. You then appear as the nominee in front of Senate Judiciary Committee hearings, and they kind of sound you out over stuff and check your check your suitability. They then vote on whether you should be nominated. Your nomination should be successful, and then it's voted for on the Senate floor. This can be hugely controversial. It is normally all along party lines, which is one of the things that can affect deciding on retirement, because you might want to retire when there's a president of the same kind of political leaning as you, but then you might have to be very mindful about the situation in the Senate as well, because if you go at a certain point, you might have a Democrat president, but if there's a Republican Senate, are they actually going to be able to get their nomination through? And all this fits in with the major criticism of all of this, is that it's become hugely political. And this has been very, very overt, very notably in recent years in the presidencies of Trump and in part with Obama. Now, Republicans generally tend to nominate conservative judges. Democrats tend to nominate liberal judges. And because of this politicalization and party line voting in the Senate, it's starting to take on a new dimension in terms of the politics of the Supreme Court. On occasion, the president has the ability to change the balance of the court, and this has been the case with Trump, and that's when it becomes even more important. So if we look at Obama, then Obama appointed Sotomayor in 2009, replacing David Souter. She's the first Hispanic member of the Supreme Court. Has been a consistently liberal judge, again, as you would probably expect from an Obama appointment. Now, Souter, who she replaced, had been nominated by Bush, and again, at the time of his nomination, believed to be highly conservative, but had proven actually himself to be liberal. So really, we got a liberal justice coming in for a liberal justice, so nothing really changes. Eleanor Kagan was appointed in 2010. She's proven to be a liberal but moderate liberal justice, so she's kind of towards the middle of the court. And she replaced John Stevens, who was a long-standing judge who, particularly in his later years, had been seen as a key part of the liberal wing of the court. So again, we've got a moderately liberal judge replacing a moderately liberal judge. Now, in 2016, Obama nominated Merrick Garland to fill in a gap that had been left by the death of Scalia, who had been a highly significant conservative justice. Now, this would have given Obama opportunity to shift the composition of the court, whereas his previous two nominations hadn't. Now, Obama had about 10 months left of his final term in office when this opportunity came up, and essentially the Republican Senate just stood in his way. So Garland had been picked because he was quite moderate, actually. He would have been fairly central in the court. So Obama was aware that he had to get it through a Republican Senate, so he didn't really want to push it with a highly liberal nomination. But the Republicans just refused to listen to the nomination. They said, because in his last year of his term, that essentially there was no grounds. It should be left to the next president. And even more scary with this, there was actually talk amongst some Republicans that if Clinton had won, they would have been, and they'd held control of the Senate, they would have been willing to leave that 9th seat on the Supreme Court vacant for the entire term. So we can see here really strong politicization of the Supreme Court. And this is because a lot of the issues that particularly the Republicans really care about in terms of gun rights, abortion, death penalty, things like that, then it's probably more important actually to have a conservative Supreme Court than it is to whoever's sat in the White House. And this is something that then feeds into the 4 years of Trump. So Trump's term in terms of the Supreme Court is really unusual. So in 2017, he nominated Neil Gorsuch, replacing the conservative Scalia. And so we've got a conservative replaced by a conservative, so the balance of the court stays the same. Again, another thing that's really important with this, he was only 49 when nominated, making one of the youngest ever Supreme Court justices. So we're looking at something that's embedding that conservative on the court in the long term. And the voting records actually of Gorsuch and Kavanaugh are quite interesting on some issues, but both of these guys are going to be seen as fairly solidly conservative. So the second one, Brett Kavanaugh, nominated in 2018, who replaced Anthony Kennedy, who'd been appointed by Reagan. Now, Kennedy had often been seen as the swing vote, who sometimes voted conservatives, and well, mainly had voted conservatives, but sometimes had voted with the liberals on the court. He was he'd been appointed by Reagan, so he'd been around for a very long time. So this again is changing the nature of the court, because we've got someone who is more conservative coming in from someone who was kind of moderate in the middle of the court. Now, the nomination was enormously controversial. There were at least 3 counts of accusations of sexual assault against Kavanaugh. he actually was the narrowest ever nomination in terms of the voting. It got in by the closest possible margin. But he has changed the balance of the court. Now this balance then swung completely in 2020. And the death of the renowned liberal justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg led to there being a position on the court. Now, again, the argument you would seem would just be repeated, because essentially the Senate hadn't shifted very much. It was still a Republican Senate, and they'd argued that there was no way that Obama should be allowed to make an appointment in his final year. Actually, at this point, some of the early voting had even opened up in 2020 for the election, and so the Democrats said, look, you said 4 years ago that 10 months out was too late to make an appointment, so 2 months out is definitely too close to an election for things to be done. And the Republicans reneged on what they said 4 years earlier. Essentially, they reversed their arguments and said, actually, no, it's fine for Trump to make this appointment. It's absolutely fine, and actually went through in a breakneck speed. And it's difficult to miss the politicization here, because yes, there was a very good chance Trump was going to lose, and he lost, and there was a chance that the Republicans might lose control of the Senate. And they have, and so they had to get this done, because this was the opportunity to replace a renowned liberal with a renowned conservative, and shift the balance of the court for the foreseeable future. And this proved too great a temptation to kind of put Republicans off the accusations of hypocrisy that they would face on those two decisions we've seen over Garland and then over Coney Barrett. Again, this is seen as a particularly important one when it comes to abortion, because Coney Barrett has a long-standing opposition to the idea of abortion, and so this could have huge ramifications for the court. Now, right at the end of Trump's term in office, we did, however, get a reminder of the limitation of power that a president has in relation to the court. Trump apparently was absolutely horrified by the fact that the Supreme Court just threw out his baseless claims in relation to the 2020 election, because he believed that his judges, the justices that he appointed, would back him, and that the other conservatives would back him, because all conservatives would stick together. And he's got a kind of a conservative loaded court now, 6-3. But they didn't. And one of the things that highlights quite nicely is, once that Supreme Court justice is in place, the president loses all power over them, and we've seen that with numerous justices over time, where they have moved away from the political ethos, maybe, of the person who appointed them. So I hope that's been helpful for you, giving again some detail about the Supreme Court and its relationship with the president, and in particular the appointments and nominations under Obama and Trump. Just to reiterate, this is part of my playlist for A-level politics, also part of my playlist for US politics. If you have found this helpful, please hit the like button. If you have any questions or comments, then please leave those in the comments section. And if you are interested in all this stuff, and particularly if you're doing A-level politics, then make sure you subscribe, and you'll get notifications as I add more and more videos to this playlist. Thank you very much for watching.